Welcome to 600 Seconds in HRTech. I am here with the Cornerstone team at LT London. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can you take a second and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mike Baker. I'm Senior Vice President for EMEA here at Cornerstone.
My name is Kate Graham, and I am Director for Competitive Intelligence.
Wonderful. I have some questions for you all about the conference, but also about some of the things that are happening at Cornerstone. Is that cool?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. First question is, you've been here for maybe half a day, maybe 3/4 of a day. What conversations are you having that you didn't expect to have?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure that I'm having a lot of conversations that I'm not expecting to have, but the conversations we're having are generally around how do we bring agents and AI into our business? How do we move to a more skills-based organization? How do we be more agile in our learning and development strategy? So those are the sorts of things that I expected to hear, and that's what we're hearing. I don't know if you're hearing different.
Yeah, not different. I thought your session this morning was great. You didn't pay me to say that. But it was really interesting when Peter and Serena and Jackie were talking about, from a budgetary perspective, there's actually an expectation and a demand to be investing in AI. So even though AI might not be top of their shopping list in terms of things that they need, there is an expectation from the business that they will become more AI enabled, and there is budget within that. So I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of organizations are almost hesitant or not sure, as Mike saying, how to do this, but there is sort of pressure for them to do it as well. So actually the customer is like in the squeezed middle, which is really interesting.
I think that is interesting as well. I feel like we're having more intense conversations than we've ever had before, a more sophisticated conversation about what learning is going to be in the future, how we're going to develop employees in the future.
100%. There isn't a single company that I haven't spoken to in the last 6 months that isn't going through some kind of transformation.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is centered around skills, around workforce intelligence, strategic workforce planning. But every company is on the same journey, but at different points. And what I think is really interesting right now is that everybody kind of knows what they want to do, but they have no idea how to get there. And that's a lot of the conversations that I'm having at the moment.
So I'm really interested. Serena brought it up today in the presentation, which you all can watch if you want to. But she brought up in the presentation that the lines between learning and talent seem to be blurring a little bit. We're seeing that in the technology for sure. Learning technology is doing more on both ends than they have in the past when it comes to, basic talent stuff. I'm wondering, in the organizations that you're talking to, are there rearrangements happening between learning and talent? Are we seeing some consolidation or some joint initiatives or anything like that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's almost come full circle. When I started in this space, like 10, 15 years ago, was all about how do we tie competencies to performance outcomes, to learning interventions. And now that's really shifted to skills and workforce agility, and how do career and talent mobility tie into learning and skills development. So we're definitely having those kinds of conversations right now. So, how do I make learning more relevant to my career path and the specific career choices that I may want to take? And from an organizational perspective, how am I able to promote more internal mobility, move people around my organization more effectively through understanding their skills better? And so I think those things are starting to converge a lot more closely. There was a patch in the middle there where they became very separate.
Yeah.
Where that was an HR thing and that was a learning thing. And I see that very much coming to more of a holistic view again. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing or not.
Yeah, I would say exactly that. I mean, I was nodding my head off earlier in your presentation. I think that learning's not an island anymore. It can't be an island. It has to feed into that bigger talent picture. And then likewise, the talent picture has to feed into the HR picture, and the HR picture has to feed into the strategic picture. So I think we're seeing those silos in terms of those HR areas of expertise still exist, and the functions still exist, but that blurring of boundaries from an outcomes and objectives perspective. But then also we're seeing the tech, I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but like the tech walls then and the boundaries have to then change.
Well, I know. I was just going to add to that, because you said a word there that I think I'm hearing all the time, which is outcomes.
Okay.
Now, I'm, as a head of learning, a chief learning officer or a chief HR officer, I'm being pushed more and more to deliver outcomes for my business. And it can't just be I've delivered this many courses or I've delivered this much training or I've promoted this much skills. It has to be, well, how is that actually moving the needle for our organization? And that conversation, especially in the context of the macroeconomics right now, has become so acute. So a lot of people want to talk about that at the moment.
Acute, right?
Yeah.
Not cute.
Yeah.
So I have a question specifically for you as Cornerstone, because I have seen you all move from like, we're an LMS and we're acquiring other LMSs to much more of a talent suite now. You acquired skills, you acquired the data, you're looking sort of end to end, and even your marketing seems to be leaning that way. So as you're doing that, I mean, you're seeing this happen within organizations where learning and talent are maybe a little bit more closely aligned as they have been in the past. Does it change who your buyer is? And how are you making that conversation bigger?
Cornerstone, I talk about where we were like 10, 15 years ago. Cornerstone was the first company to really bring learning and performance together. And, for a while there, do you remember the days of unified talent management, integrated talent management? And that's what everyone was talking about at the time. And it comes back to what I was saying before around competencies and performance goals and outcomes. So we've been doing it for a long time, but it's come around again now. And so what I think it's evolved into is now more around workforce orchestration, skills intelligence, and as a base layer, and around how do we then automate some of this, and how do we go through that transformation? So within that context, our buy hasn't changed, but it's additive.
Okay.
So we now have more buyers than we've ever had before, more stakeholders in the process. We're still talking to the CHRO, who still has transformational goals and workforce planning agenda to manage, but increasingly we're talking to the CIO as well, who needs to bring agentic solutions across the business to automate processes and provide efficiency. We're now talking to both ends of that spectrum. Whereas before it was maybe just the HR line, if you like. We're now very much in OT as well.
Okay, interesting. So this morning in the presentation, we talked about committee buys, basically.
Yes.
Because we're seeing much more people involved in that buy. Very interesting. I want to talk a little bit to you all about data. Yeah. So there's the technology that can do wonderful things if the data is just nice and clean and pure, but we know that doesn't actually happen. So I'm wondering, as you're working with the organizations that you're working with, how prepared are they to have the right data to do this sort of end-to-end solution that you're talking about? And if they're not prepared, what would you recommend that they do?
I think generally some organizations are different on parts of the journey, as I said, but generally they're not prepared. Okay. I think, and this is the non-sexy part of agentic that nobody's talking about, which is, we can run agents up really quickly and we can build an agent for everything really fast and the innovation's really quick. But if we don't have the context engine that's bringing signals across from the right data sources, then you're just going to be getting work slop. You're going to be getting hallucinations. So data becomes really, really key just to have that context. And I think no one's talking about that enough right now. And I think that, being able to augment data sources across your business to solve those problems. The other thing is that companies are saying, well, that's all very well and good, but, I haven't got a job architecture and I can't do jobs to skills mapping and it's going to take me a year to do it and it's going to cost a lot of money. And so they're sort of stuck in this sort of analysis paralysis position where I don't think I've got the data to do it. Yeah. And therefore I can't move forward. And I think that's where actually AI can also be part of the solution. How do we speed that process up and provide the money? But it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that's why the dream of the skills-based organization hasn't materialized, right? That anywhere. I don't think any of us have seen an organization, they've got it nailed, right? Everybody is still wrestling with this, and the data is a huge part of it. I would argue actually there's a mindset shift as well in terms of skills-based organizations, because actually, I like my team. I don't want my team to go off and do gigs. Like, I've worked really hard to nurture those people, right? And, I don't want them to just go off over that. I want to keep them. So I think there is institutionalized mindsets that also need to be tackled, which is probably even harder than tackling the data. But I think, again, I talked earlier about silos. And it's like, where are you pulling that data from? How does it get kind of integrated? What's the master set, the one source of truth, those kinds of things? And it is that unsexy part that people aren't talking about. And it's the same as kind of how are your agents being trained? How are your agents compliant? What's the governance around all of this? It's the bit that no one wants to dig into, but it makes such a big impact on the strategy and the how that you were talking about.
So how are you helping organizations do it? Because until they have their data in order, Cornerstone can't do for them what they could do if their data was in order. You know?
Yeah, there's a number of things we're doing at the moment with organizations from a technology enablement perspective. I think one of the key things is when we think about all this workforce planning that's going on, we bring it back on the data. It's shocking to me how many organizations are making those decisions around this part of my organization I'm going to automate, I'm going to replace with agents, or this part of my process I'm going to replace with agents. But they're doing it without any understanding of what the skills and the tasks are associated with those roles. And so they're not using data-driven decisions to make it. They're using intuition, they're using 9-box grids, and I think it's frightening. And actually, when you think about it, HR is one of the only departments in an organization that isn't really going deep on data before they're making those core decisions. So what we're doing is we're bringing in something that I think is reasonably unique. Well, it's unique in the marketplace, which is we're bringing together our acquisition of Skyhive, which brings in labor market intelligence. Mm-hmm. We're using the data that we have from our 7,000 customers, and we're building a really powerful context engine, which we call People Graph. And it's from that context engine that we're able to provide the true understanding of skills, people, tasks, across the business, and also bring in inference and signals from other systems to be able to get that really true picture. And in that sense, you don't necessarily have to have a fully fledged out job architecture and job mapping, because we can provide AI to do a lot of that mapping and inference for you to bring that context together. And that then becomes the foundation that you can start to say, well, tell me what propensity of jobs I have in my organization that can be automated. Maybe it's 80% of that role, but it's only 20% of that role. And we can start to really do strategic workforce planning. And it's that skills that we have from 7,000 customers and everything that helps us to pull that together.
One thing I'd add to that as well is the services side of it. So I think, we're so busy talking about product all the time, like everybody collectively, but, we will have things like phase 0. So how do you get ready? Okay. To do that stuff. So I think the services part of it, again, doesn't get talked about very much, but is so key to that customer. It's not just like lob it over the fence. There's a bit of tech, off you go.
Okay.
I'd say that, in the SaaS world right now, everyone's talking about what's your moat? What's your competitive moat? Cornerstone's competitive moat is just the vast quantities of data that we're collecting, both from the labor market, but also from, 20 years of learning and skills data that we've collected. And that gives us a huge data repository that we can bring together that brings not just the probabilistic data that you need for AI, but also the deterministic guardrails to make sure that, you're making right decisions as a human in the center, and it's going to deliver good quality outcomes. And I think when I look at some of the solutions that are out there right now, that's the bit that's missing, is that real context. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So can I go off script a little bit?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I have this question because there is a school of thought, a group of people that think that in the future, data is going to be the true differentiator between organizations. It's going to be secret sauce, so to speak. And that vendors are no longer going to own that data. They might see it once in a while, but they're not going to be able to use it for the analysis that you just talked about.
Right.
So I'm wondering, first of all, what do you think about that school of thought? And second of all, if it's true, which I think it probably is, how does that change your game plan?
I think companies are running right now to either own the application layer or the data layer, right? Uh-huh. That's where they are. But I think that the key important thing to note here is that we don't own the data.
Yeah. But you have access to it to now.
It's our customers' data. Sure. What we're able to do is use that to build out the complex context engines that are needed to be able to run agentic or workforce planning or anything else. And what we want to do is have a very non-jealous approach to that. So we want to integrate and augment with all other systems. And they may be HR systems, but they may be application layers in other parts of the business so that we can build that true picture together. And I think because of the skills data we can bring in from labor market, because of the historical context we have, it gives us a really strong position, but it's not our data. And I think, that's going to be key, is how we orchestrate it in the future.
It's also about not charging customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
For using their data for our ends. And that is the reaction I'm seeing from other quarters, shall we say, elsewhere, is like, that's my organization's data. It's fine that you kind of get to see that and do that and whatever within obviously the guardrails that are separate as part of the contract, but don't then like charge me to run queries against it. So and that is the pricing side of things is obviously, as I'm sure you've been researching, is a huge area. So I think that is again something different from our perspective.
Do you think that there's a world where people will shut down their data and be like, no, you provide the tool or the agent, but the data is all going to live internally and nobody's going to have access to it?
I think, look, possibly. It's just at the infancy of all of this. And I always think there's a lot of parallels. I know it's very different, but there's a lot of parallels with when we all moved into the cloud. And people started building their own applications and then realized what it was going to take to maintain them, to innovate in them. And I think we're going to see it's obviously a lot easier to run up and build an agent and maintain it than it is a whole cloud application. But I think we're going to see some of those parallels where some companies will say, it was my data, the world that we're in right now, I don't want to. And I think they're going to find that the context that they're able to glean from that data will become less and less powerful. Because if you're not out there augmenting that with other things, then you're going to lose a lot of power. And I think there'll be in other companies as well who, in other businesses, will have a very much more open approach without the guardrails and will be making decisions based on flawed data. So I think there will be some there will be some failed AI projects that come up, and I think that's going to help guide us on where we want to go. But I don't think we've figured out entirely yet how that all works. I think philosophically, Cornerstone, it's not our data. It's data that we've collected and captured over many years that we continue to every day. But it's our customers' data. It's the market data. And that's what we want to make sure that we're able to surface that. So it solves outcomes. Coming back to what we were saying before, if you're not delivering an outcome through an investment in AI, then why are you doing it? To do that right, you need to have the data. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You guys have said outcomes quite a few times during this. And I'm hearing that more and more. It seems like this conference, I'm hearing outcomes more than I ever have before. It's not user experience. It's not learner experience. None of that. It's all about like, what can you help me do?
Yeah.
What can you have the business do?
I've seen such a shift in the last 18 months from HR and learning departments saying, I care about user experience. I care about employee engagement. I'm being asked to deliver an outcome and a return on investment, because that's where the businesses are in a challenging economic environment. Companies have shifted their focus. So it's important. But it's also important we don't lose the human along that journey.
It's also the pendulum swing back from COVID, right? So we saw the I was in my previous role when we saw the kind of the Great Resignation, and then everything. All suddenly they had to really care about the user experience and all of these things. And in your session earlier, you were talking about very employee-led journeys. And Jackie actually coined a phrase when we did a webinar many years ago, now 4 or 5 years ago, of I don't care if people want to learn underwater basket weaving, right? And I always stays with me. But yeah, we've seen that pendulum swing back. And also there was such an explosion in investment in HRTech, and people kind of bought these bolt-on solutions, and we saw that in the market, right? And you were tracking lots of them. But now it's like, okay, what is that delivered for us? So that partly, as well as the economic situation, etc., is all, there's a real journey since 2020, I think, that's impacted where these organizations are now.
And I think brings it back to what you were saying earlier around talent and learning merging, because now as an organization, and it's costing me X amount in employee churn every year because people are leaving the organization because we're not able to show them a career path, or we're not able to link in their, how their learning helps them prepare for new roles. And so, it's not that the companies are not thinking or caring about employee engagement. What they want to do is think about how that moves the needle on their business. So if my employees are disengaged and they're not productive, or they're quitting, then that's costing me money. So it's being able to tie those things together.
And is it the good ones that are disengaged?
Yeah.
Like, because no one cares about the bad ones, right? You can leave, like, that's fine. But how do they know if they're good or bad?
Yeah.
Because you haven't got the data or the insights, right?
Thank you both for being here, Kate and Mike, and for giving some insights into Cornerstone, but also what you're seeing in the conference and what you're seeing in the market.
Pleasure.
Hey, I just finished reviewing the video with Mike and Kate, and there are a couple of things from that conversation that really stood out to me. The first one has to do with data. Data is increasingly becoming important because it helps our AI run right, and it helps our skills run right, and it helps us make better decisions and all of the things. And so many of the organizations that I talk to are sort of dipping into data. Mike said something interesting. He said that HR is the last department that makes big decisions without data, which is true. We're still relying on sort of the good old HR gut check, which probably needs to stop. Many companies are deciding which roles to automate using intuition and 9-box grids, and maybe that is outdated and we should be thinking about it differently. And this resonates really well for where Cornerstone is going, because they want to help organizations make better decisions. They are moving from a learning platform to a talent platform, and they're doing a lot more of the talent types of things that we've seen before. So career planning and talent mobility and workforce planning, and those types of things are now part of their solution. And so it makes sense that they would be particularly concerned about data. So data is the first thing that we saw. The second thing that I found interesting in this conversation was they talked about providing solutions, not necessarily providing tech. And this seems to be one of the things that I heard a lot at Learning Technologies is organizations are moving away from, hey, I got this cool tool and I'll give it to you, and then you can do things within your own organization, to much more of a sort of end-to-end, hey, we can solve this problem for you. We can help you understand where the gaps are, and we can work with you to determine what needs to happen in order to solve those gaps. And again, this fits in really well to Cornerstone's strategy of sort of end-to-end, we can help you solve this problem. I think what's interesting and what we'll see, I think, with more of these conversations is there seem to be two approaches to this. There is either the end-to-end continuous loop thing that we're seeing with some of the larger platforms, or we're also seeing composable and headless as a way to fit into technology that organizations already have. So those seem to be two really different ways of thinking about where technology is going. I don't know who's going to win yet. Maybe nobody. Maybe there's a place for both of them in the market, but we're definitely hearing those. And Cornerstone sort of leans over to much more to the sort of like, we can solve this problem for you. We can help you with your data. We can do all those things there. So those are the two things that stood out. If you like this, continue to follow us and listen. We'll be talking to vendors at least once a week and sharing this information out. Thanks.